Okay. And we go back to the beginning. I think it might be on auto. Okay, welcome everyone for coming. I really appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy schedule. Before I hand it over to Kevin and Mark, our consultants, and Bethany's online, I just wanted to go with a couple of opening comments. We have a couple of new faces, so trying to bring you up to speed. We have videos of the past couple of sessions online. We also have the presentations and the reports afterwards. So if you have any questions, feel free to reference those and then just ask up during the small group section of today's event. So, this is a very exciting project. I mean, we're going to be able to shape the future of the U district by setting what this key cross street will look like for the future. We want to define the quality and the actual experience of the street. It is one of 3 green streets that have been designated by the city in our neighborhood. We have Brooklyn, we have 43rd, which was completed recently, and now 42nd Street. With the upzone of 2017, we have the high rises surrounding us. And outside of downtown, this is the only neighborhood that has high rises. So we're expecting about 5,000 new households. So we have a lot of those people and coming. Where are they all going to go? We think they're going to spill out into our streets. So the important thing is to make sure the streets work for people. And our green street must serve people of all ages, all abilities, all modes of traffic. Most importantly, it has to become a destination because we're in competition with Capitol Hill and other places along the light rail where people can choose to spend an afternoon here or somewhere else. So we need to have a place where people feel comfortable, a place for outdoor dining, window shopping, festivals and play, music out in the street, and just meeting up with friends, every week. So today we're considering the decisions that we make will set the tone for the next 5 to 10 years in our district or even longer. So it's really important that we're designing the 42nd Street of the future, not for today. To try to think about how we're going to be using it when we have even more people living in our neighborhood and more people probably not coming by car, but coming by bike or by transit. So please think of those things when you're looking at the street and how we can plan for it. But this project is exceptional in that we're looking at implementation. When this is done, we're hoping that the designs that we decide upon, we can take back to the city and say, hey, here's something you can start fundraising for. So we can start thinking about this project being realized in the next 5, 7 years, maybe. So it's going to take some time, but today is pretty important. And I'm so glad you guys are here.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for reminding us how important these concepts are and the importance of this street in our neighborhood. Do I have a clicker? Or I'm just going to tell you.
Yes, sorry.
That's fine. Can you go ahead? Welcome, everyone. I'm Kevin Van Meter with Landscape Architect at Site Workshop Landscape Architects, and we're the design consultant on this project. Today, we're going to talk about these 2 concepts in front of you, meander and market. And coming up, we have a public open house, and then leading toward our final concept design that we will provide as move on. After my presentation, we'll be discussing in the groups at our tables that we're at, and I'll be joining your table over here. Okay. This is what we heard from our last meeting. I'm going to go through this just quickly. These are some of the highlights that we made sure to incorporate into our both concepts here. So last time we showed a one-way vehicle option, and we heard that it was important to have 2-way traffic. So both of these concepts show the 2-way traffic. We learned that it's important to have more hardscape, less planting than some of the concepts last time had. That we would want to raise Brooklyn Avenue intersection as well as the other intersection at the Ave. We needed prioritize vehicle spaces for loading, pickup, and ADA. Also prioritizing pedestrian space near the Ave with maybe the vehicle spaces further away from that pedestrian corridor. Study how to successfully incorporate curbless. There's a lot of questions of how can we do this well. So both of the options that you have in front of you are curbless, and they approach that in 2 different ways that we'll get to in a moment. And then also allowing for a full scale farmers market. So that will need to have enough space for 45 10 by 10 market stalls. And both of these concepts do that. And we'll talk more about that later as the presentation goes on. First, before I get into the concepts, we did, for the question of parking and where do vehicles go and how do people access this space on cars, we did a 1-block parking analysis, just looking at how many options there are for delivery, pickup, and parking within 1 block of our street that we're talking about. I'm not going to go too much into depth on this, but you can see there's a bunch of parking on Brooklyn, and there's various spaces on the Ave and on 15th to a lesser extent. So we have 2 options.
Share on screen.
I'm sorry?
Can you share on screen?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. I'm such a rookie. Okay, sorry about that. Here we go. Can you see okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You want to go back to the 2 concepts, 2 approaches?
Okay, 1 second.
So we have 2 approaches, one we call market and one meander. The meander one is named after the way the street moves through. It's not going straight through. It is wiggling a little bit. It's meandering. Sorry. And the market we named because it would allow market. It's a more typical linear street pattern, and we named it market because it would allow for that, what you see like on Brooklyn at the farm or on the Ave, further up where the market, where you're walking straight down the street and there's stalls on both sides. So it allows for more of that typical farmer's market condition when you're in an event mode on that street. So now I'm going to go through each concept relatively quickly, but looking at each block so we can see some detail of what's going on. So this is the market concept. We have raised intersections at the 2 street intersections here with a different pattern, concrete, maybe stamped, maybe colored. We're showing a colored option here. There's options there, but the idea is to differentiate these intersections and the alley crossing. We're showing concrete finish with special scoring on the sidewalks, with then a lighter color concrete on the street there to differentiate the primary people space from the car space. You see, we're showing new trees in tree grates, so they wouldn't have vegetation right around them. There'd be soil underneath the paving for their roots and water, but there's a lot of hardscape space for people to move around. And on this option, one of the things I'd like to point out is that right along the edge of this curveless, we're showing these bollards. And so those bollards are going to be maybe 6-inch diameter. They could be metal, they could be concrete posts that are coming up, and that's holding the separation between this pedestrian safe space and this street space, even though we have no curb at that location. What the bollards allow us to do is have a lot of flexibility of what we're doing in that people space just inside of there. So we might have furnishings there, picnic tables, cafes for restaurants, public seating. We're showing pedestrian light poles, are these circle dots that are going right down the street on both sides. They're in line with these trees. Can you maybe describe the risks? Okay, yeah. So we have in both options, the vehicle space is 18 feet wide, which is the minimum required and is sufficient for 2-way vehicle traffic and for emergency access. And on this concept, both the sidewalk sides are about 20 feet from building face to that curbless edge. So we have more of an equality on both sides, and there's this 6-foot clear pedestrian zone by the building frontages on both sides. So there's no furnishings or anything in that zone. So there's always a clear pedestrian space. And then the furnishing zones would be between that 6-foot and then the street.
And for accessibility, for ADA?
For ADA, there's going to be detection strips along the edge of that curbless, which is typical in Seattle. And there's also a special detection at the intersections there. And we'll, as further requirements or ideas come up with SDOT, we'll be continuing that conversation.
It looks like you're having the picnic tables as an example there in the brown. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there's picnic table examples. So the furnishings are examples, as you mentioned. They would be refined later. Part of the idea is that there might be more exciting, special kind of non-movable furnishings and some that are movable. Do you want to bring up a question?
Yeah, any parking area or
I'm going to have a parking diagram come up soon, and we can talk about that there. Thank you for that. So right now I'm going to go over the big one. So we're continuing now. 15th is on the right over here, and it's again a similar kind of feel. We have our 20-foot wide pedestrian space both sides of the street. with the bollards separating, holding that space. We have some parking here and here, and then we have different furnishings depending on how much space we have with when there's parking or not. Okay. All right, now we're going to look at the meander concept in a little closer detail. So in here, we have our road, our main vehicular is meandering across. It changes at the alley there. We have some parking at the wide where we have the wide pedestrian zones. And so what you have with the meander concept is you have changing pedestrian space on both sides as you move across. So here we have about a 30-foot wide area that can be pedestrian. It can also incorporate parking. And over here, it's closer to 12 feet on the narrow side. And that flip-flops when you get over here, where we have that 12 feet and then that 30 feet on the north end.
Kevin, so the 12 feet is what exists today.
Yeah.
Building phase or property line curb phase.
So this line right here is the existing curb. We would remove the curb and replace it with a curbless condition, but that's existing width that we can imagine. And we've given all that extra space to the north side right there, or to the south side right here.
How does the drainage work on this version?
Let's get into that more later. Thank you. This is important.
One second thought too, is that even though we do have that wide space, which is nice, in front of the Stanford, we'll have to contain all of the structures that activate an outdoor activity to the sidewalk areas or that parking strip, meaning we'll still have to maintain the fire lane. So you can have people walking in the fire lane, but without a lot of extra planning, you won't be able to have tents there.
Yeah, we'll get into the event situation later. Yes, I'll show you what that looks like. So we thought about that. But correct. So this vehicular clear space would also be the emergency access. This is two-way. It is two-way. So we have an 18-foot wide street, cars going both ways. In this option, we're not showing bollards on that curbless condition. What we have instead is made sure to have furnishings that are pushed up closer to the curbless edge that are consistent across the whole space. So here we have these picnic tables. Here we have these benches. There's light poles and trees and smaller seating cubes there. So it's a different approach to holding that edge. And we'll show some precedent examples to talk about that later. So one option is having these bollards that march across, and one is having more an eclectic mix of furnishings and poles that are holding that space. Another thing I want to point out here is you can see the paving. We're showing these unit pavers that go across the entire space. So we have the same surfacing treatment across the whole street. That again, this is an approach that could be applied to the other option. And that's another topic for discussion today is, do we like the different textures and colors across the different spaces? Or do we like this uniform approach? And we'll show some examples of what that looks like in real life too.
Clarify, the bollard versus like furniture be applied to the other option.
Yeah. So that's also can go to either option. The one thing that can't change is this one has a meander and the other one is straight. So that's a topic for conversation. You'll see that some of the ways in this one, we strategically put in a few more planting spaces with plants, and those are at these parking locations. So they close off the ends of those parking situations. Right here and here and here. Okay. This is looking on the other side. So that meander has mirrored. So we start off on the bottom and we come back up to the north. So it's a very similar configuration. We've just mirrored it to this side of the street. All right, now I'm going to go to some diagrams that talk to some of these questions that we've had in a little bit more detail. I would also know that I'm gonna bring up the topics right here, and then the main goal of today is that our small groups that we discuss basically the questions that these diagrams are bringing up, so that we come to some understanding of what are people's thoughts, what are people's preferences relating to these topics. So this is showing where the parking is. The vehicle spaces are assigned on both street concepts. You can see that there's these 3 bars of vehicle stalls on this market concept. And here we have these 4 bars in the meander concept. We've also done a first pass at assigning where is an ADA spot, where is loading, and where's food pickup places. So that's yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think that one of the other things too, temporally, those could change.
Yeah, so the idea of the evening is they could be parking spaces for parking vehicles. So we'll talk more about this in your small groups. One thing to note, sorry, on that concept is that, for example, in here, there is flexibility of where those parking stalls are going. They could flip flop across the street. In this one, they need to be where they are in the sense that they are at those wide zones of the pedestrian space. Okay. So this shows the blue band shows that pedestrian clear space right against the building frontages. That's minimum of 6 feet. In some situations, it's a little bit more here. So nothing can go in that zone except it has to stay clear for people to walk. And then this is highlighting, the orange color is highlighting where are those opportunities for amenities, for outdoor seating, for street cafes, for street trees, for pedestrian poles to go. So you can see in the market concept, those opportunities are kind of straight down the middle on both sides, pretty equal on both sides. And the meander concept, this amenity zone, has a more interesting shape to it that is less equal across the street, has a difference across the street. And this one also highlights where the planting areas are that would have plants exposed. So there's a little bit more in the meander concept where we have them bookending those parking spaces. Okay. And this is showing the surfacing. Again, the surfacing can change between the two concepts. On the meander, we see that singular surfacing across the street that includes the pedestrian space and the vehicular space, making it maybe more inviting for someone to walk across the street, making it feel more like a pedestrian plaza space while cars are still allowed. And then in this upper concept, we have clear delineations between the intersections, between the pedestrian space and the vehicular space.
You've not probably said this, but are they both curveless?
They're both curved, yeah, both curved concepts, yeah.
One thing that came up in the meeting with ESTA was that because this is a non-arterial street, jaywalking is allowed. So I think surfacing, that is ambiguous between sidewalk and street is okay.
It is, yeah, it's definitely okay. And we have safety in terms of accessibility, having that edge being very clear for pedestrians walking across, also for vehicles, the edge is being held by fixed elements that are raised above the ground. And one concept, one point of this meander that I'll bring up that I didn't mention before is that part of the meander also helps slow cars down a little bit more. Cars are completely welcome through 2 ways, but because when you're driving through, you don't see all the way down the block and you have to make this little turn partway through, cars are going to be going slower in that concept, and pedestrians will have a little bit more safety in that concept.
You were saying before that materiality could flip on either one of these, so we could do the pavers on the top one and have that still that same.
Yeah, and you could also do this materiality, more differentiation on the bottom. This is showing how the market configuration would happen in each concept. So these are the yellow squares are represent 45 10 by 10 market stalls. And you can see that in the top concept, you could, just like on the Ave further up the street, you could close off the street and people could walk down the center. You'd have stalls on both sides. And you could get all those tents. To fit that in the meander concept, because we have really wide zones for pedestrian space and really narrow zones, it becomes more of these islands of tents that are going to be facing both towards the buildings and toward the street. So someone who is entering this would walk more around these zones of tents. Also, we have tents in front of the alleys in this concept. So the alleys would need to be closed off during the market in the meander concept if we had the full 45 suite of tents.
Yeah, the top one is very similar to a street fair, but some complaints about street fair is that you put your back to all the businesses. So the bottom one, by having people move around and circulate, it also animates the facades for all the window shopping. So that might be something to consider.
One of the other things to consider, though, is if you look at how they do the farmers market on the north end, they don't do it that way. They do it as a go-on, and I think that's more of a successful. They like it when you can bounce between vendors.
And let's have this conversation more in our groups.
Yep.
Good points. But part of the discussion is going to be a part of the choice about meander. There's lots of distinctions between meander and the straight concept, but this is one of the important ones: is how would it work in an event space? How would it work with the market? All right, so these are some of the topics that we want to be discussing in our small groups. I'm going to read them in a moment. I'm also going to go through some precedent examples, and we're going to be thinking about, I'm going to be discussing these topics in those precedent examples. and then I'm going to release us to our groups. So the topics are for today are meander versus straight. It's one of the big things we want to talk about today. How does your group feel about that? You might like both concepts, so what do you see as being different there?
Just a really quick clarifying question. Is the only version of meander the most extreme that you've shown, or can you meander less?
You could meander less. I don't know. I mean, yeah, and if your group comes up with a reason why that would make sense, I mean, talk about that. We're showing the larger meander to really get the full meander effect.
Well, full meander effect on it is also to maximize islands. As you start to like water that down, it's like you're not quite getting enough on one side, certainly the other. So it becomes a little more challenging than many and eating the market.
Yeah, it would be hard to put those stalls in if we did partial. Talking about the loading, delivery, pickup, and parking. So we can talk about the day night. We've already talked about the day night, that in the evening it could be more parking. But looking at how these diagrams show where the parking is and what they're assigned to, and any refinements on that. Are there any businesses that aren't getting their needs met with either of these layouts? Are there changes, tweaks we could do to make that work better? Talking about events, so specifically focusing on the market, but with the mind where they could be for other events as well. How does the meander versus straight work for different events? Talking to the balance of planting and hardscape is a little bit different in each of the concepts. Meander currently has a little bit more. This market has a little bit less of exposed planting. That, of course, is a lot of can change. So how are these concepts feeling right now? Surfacing, as we talked about, the single surfacing treatment across the whole space from building to building versus distinctions between the pedestrian, vehicular, and intersections. And then seating and bollards. So how are the furnishings working in the different concepts? They're being used to hold that edge of that curbless condition. How do we feel about the bollards? How do we feel about doing that with an eclectic mix of furnishings and poles? And then lastly, lighting. In both concepts, we're showing pedestrian light poles going both up the whole street. They're basically right adjacent to the pedestrian sidewalk, the clear space right against the buildings. And so we're showing these poles. There could be catenary lights strung between the poles going up the street, parallel to the traffic. Much more challenging would be having catenary lights going across the street. So, but talking about how that lighting is working and there are additional preferences there.
With the bollards, like the condition of having them and then the market, is the assumption that they're far enough apart that a stall, like how does a bollard interact with
The stall will be held back a little bit from the bollard. Yeah, so there'd be some space there. So the bollard might be like a little obstruction that is kind of like where two tents might be meeting, but the bollards might be, I mean, I don't have an exact number, but maybe 8 feet on center or something. Okay. So now I'm going to talk through a few precedent examples with these topics in mind. It's not going to be a big conversation. I'm just going to be pointing out some things I see. You have these images at your table. Each table has a packet of them, so you can continue to talk about them at your small groups and refresh your memory. You also have a packet of the diagrams that we just sent through at your table. So this is 43rd. Bring it up because as a few of the elements we're talking about, clearly very different than what either of these concepts are looking like for our street. But we do have some things that are similar to our options here. We have. This is one of the ones where it's like, okay, we're not going to copy this, but we do see in here they're working with this difference of materials. So we have this clear distinction of material in that amenity space right adjacent to the concrete streetway. We're also seeing these light poles that are going, these pedestrian light poles that are going down the street, creating a line and a clarity down the street there. And then we're having some of these more movable picnic table furnishings. And of course, you all know there's more of those down one line.
It's all concrete.
It's all, okay, it's all concrete, just colored and scored. Yeah. This is over in Kirkland. So this is a condition showing bollards. These bollards are probably closer spaced than what we would do, I'm imagining. But you can see what that can feel like where the bollards are holding the space. It means that you can do a lot of options with the pedestrian space and the furnishings on the backside. Here on this street, most of the seating is up closer to the building frontages. In our street, we're a little wider, we could have a mix of that, being closer to the building frontage versus further away. But you're also seeing the pedestrian light poles going down, and you see the singular paving material go across the entire space, which really changes the feel. It makes it feel like one plaza, even though cars are definitely coming down here, and there's parking throughout. You don't see the parking. Well, yeah, the parking is actually right there. There's just no cars in it, so you can't see it when there's no cars in it because it's the same material.
It's, to be clear, this is one way.
Right.
And it meanders. It is a 60-foot wide corridor, which is almost exactly what we have. It's one lane.
This is one lane.
So it's angled parking that allows for that condition.
And how wide is that lane? Do you know?
That lane, I think it's more like 18.
Okay.
A little bit less, so it's similar to what we have. Does the street actually curve, or is it are they curved parallel building facade? Buildings are parallel. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Again, the focus here is materiality, right? Bollards, to an extent. In this case.
Here's another picture of that one. I brought this one in because it's showing some of that parking right here. It's also showing how people are utilizing the space. This is also a different time of the year. It looks a little more activated with the plants right now, with the leaves going on. But you can see, yeah, you can see parking here, you can see parking there. So that meander really closes off that view all the way down for cars driving. So cars will go much slower on the street. This is one way. It is a little narrower than ours would be, but there's some similarities there.
But people feel comfortable walking in the streets.
Yeah.
Those two.
This other picture's with a lot more people, but then you couldn't see the elements. So I didn't use those. This is also a meander. This one has concrete across with some more subtle distinctions, but clear distinctions on the surfacing, and it is not using bollards, but is using furnishings to hold the edge. So I'll talk a little bit to those. This is down in South Lake Union, down in Seattle. This is between, they had a little cheat on this one, in that they also built the buildings to create some extra street space here to accommodate the meander. The buildings also, so we couldn't do exactly this, but we can look at some of these concepts here. So we have concrete, and we have this detectable edge for accessibility. The concrete in the pedestrian space is a different finish, is darker, has this exposed aggregate, which feels a little fancier. And then we have the more typical concrete in the middle of the street here. There's a lot of fixed seating elements on the side that is helping make it so that the cars can't go over there, but people can congregate and activate that space and use that space. And then you have planting occasionally here with curbs around it, like what we have. The planting by the street on our concept also has curbs around it to hold that space. You'll also see pedestrian light poles, but they're, instead of being in a line in this concept, they're kind of going throughout this. And this is two-way. Here's Bell Street down in Belltown. This one, what I want to look at here again is we have pedestrian light poles. They're kind of jogging a little bit at the intersections. We also have one material, but with different colors. Same score pattern. So it's some playing on, it's concrete. We have these diagonal score patterns that go across the pedestrian and the vehicular space, but you have very clear distinction with color. So you can delineate that space. It's the edge on this one is being held by planters, the curbless edge planters, or furnishings that are holding that edge. There's no bollards here, and this one's straight.
But there are curbs on the planters.
There's curbs on the planters, and on the planters in these concepts, there's also curbs. Yeah. This is an example from New Zealand. This is a much narrower space, but again, wanted to show this example. It's a little washed out on the screen. We have one material across. There is a distinct color band that you can't see very well in this, at least on this image right now. Distinction, and then the edges are being held by these furnishings. So cars do come in here. You can see a car parked right there. They come through, but it's more primarily a pedestrian space. We have much narrower condition though. Okay. This is a street in Germany. This one doesn't clarify the vehicular space, but there is a wide vehicular space in there. Cars can go both ways. But there's that common materiality with some elements, these street trees that are creating a line to kind of show that differentiation between primary pedestrian space versus shared space. And then here we are, this is in Ithaca, New York. This one has common materiality across the street with a very clear separate. We have these elements, these elements going straight down on either side, creating a distinction between the middle of the street versus the two sides. So we have all of our furnishings, all of our fixed elements are in these amenity zones. You have the clear pedestrian sidewalks by the building frontages, and then you have the space that could be closed down for events in the middle, but could also have more cars in it. So those are at your table. They're meant to give some pictures to what these could be. Our concepts are different than any of those, but they have some of those elements. And some of the things in there are what's up for discussion. We saw a lot of that consistent materiality across. We also saw ones where we had clear distinctions on the materiality. So what do we prefer for this street? We also saw bollards holding that space versus furnishings holding that edge of that curbless space. We saw some lighting. I think there was one in there I didn't point out that had catenary lighting going across the street, but then there's a lot with pedestrian light poles, and some of the bollards also had lighting in the bollard example. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen while we break into our small groups. We're going to have conversations about these topics and how they relate to the two concepts, and what do we like about the different concepts. Do we want to do any changes? Will we prefer to see the paving from one concept on the other concept? And then we're also going to talk about the different vehicular stalls and how that's working. Anyway, we'll go through these different topics.
Yeah, I just wanted to say too that we have two concepts. Doesn't mean that you have to pick one. There is an option, I think, to present SDOT with two concepts going for two concepts. So, but if we feel strongly about one versus the other, I think we should share that opinion with SDOT as this 10% concept design that we have up. So that's what we'll be part of for some time until we get the funding direction, as Corey mentioned. This is a long-term project, and we hope we can fit it. It sure seems like one project versus trying to piece. And then we've had that conversation already with SDOT. Joshua is here representing the SDOT urban design folks, so the conversation we've had. So just keep that in mind. But we feel really strongly to talk about that and then give it the rest. Otherwise, we can carry over. As Kevin mentioned, a lot of these elements can cross over from plan to plan and create the preferred plan going forward. We don't have to do that with this.
With the open house that happens after this, that will kind of engage the larger community, are we thinking that we might take some of the elements off the table and still show a few options? So if like everybody's like, we hate cement, we want to do pavers, then we might show two options with pavers. Or do you think, like, how will this inform what we show there?
Yeah, it's a good question, Don, and I think we should reassess at the end of this meeting and then at our steering committee meeting, see if we want to create a single plan, or if we still feel like presenting the options, letting us go forward with the comments, the recommendations. So so at the end of the day, we're going to end up with a concept plan, which would be the plan, using precedent images and really defining materiality, the lighting, opportunities for art, events, those things. That's very standard for a concept plan to inform the design team that picks it up at 30, 60, 90, 100%. So we're going to leave them with a package and some flexibility and options. So don't feel like we got to pick everything today. We are trying to narrow down things like preferences for meander, straight if we have it. The parking's important, the loading zones and where they're placed strategically along the street. I think we've hit a stall count of 9 to 10 stalls with services the street, considering the broader parking available and loading around the neighborhood. So there's some key things we should form an opinion on today. Don't feel like we got to pick everything. So have a good discussion, and then we'll regroup at the end, summarize as we've done the past 3 meetings, And then we again are meeting as a steering committee on Friday. And every period of the stakeholder meeting, they have to really capture the thoughts that we heard just 2 days prior. Okay.
Thank you.
We've got 10:15 now, so half hour. And then or a little bit more and then come back. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we'll so about a half hour, we'll check.
Great. Welcome, Maureen. So we have Maureen, Bethany, and Mark.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm going to bring the camera over and you're going to join us at our table. So feel
Okay.
correct if you have questions, and then I'll try to, if you put things in the chat, I'll try to monitor that. But also, I understand you're at a slight disadvantage without seeing the drawings. So I'm wondering if I can send those to you. I can send you the a particular drawing or the whole presentation. It's quite large. So if I do that, it might take a while to reach you by email, but if you would like to have that, if you could put your email address in the chat, and I can send it to you right now, or I can just pull it up on the screen, whichever one you want to look at.
Yeah, or to discuss the pros.
I'm fine with on the screen at the moment, I think.
Yeah, that's.
Yes,
Okay, let me go back to the.
I'm fine with it on this screen as well. That sounds,
Great, thank you. So I'm
that
going to
sounds
pull
good.
it. I'll turn that on.
But if you could leave the screen on the two, yeah, well, one of the diagrams are, but showing us two of them.
Do you remember where that is?
It was up above, right there.
There you go.
Let me make it a little bit larger. Is that
Yeah.
good? Okay, perfect. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and bring the camera over so you can see us. And you're right in the middle of the table for the microphone.
I think last time when we were at the table together, I think we were saying we initially had 13 spaces. And then if we kept it above 8, that would be okay. But I don't know. I mean, if you feel differently, we should identify a number of spaces you think we should have.
Speak a little louder.
We're talking about parking.
This is the microphone and speaker.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Bethany, would you mind saying hello on the?
Hello.
Hello. All right, we're looking right at you. Thank
So
you.
this is 3
And we have
spaces,
Mark and Maureen in the line as well.
3 spaces.
There.
Hello.
I don't know if my camera's on or what.
It
We
is.
can see you.
Okay. My audio is a little tough. There's a lot of echoing in the back, but
Okay, don't worry. Well, we can see you, so welcome.
thank you.
So are we looking at parking first? Is that
Yeah.
what we're considering?
We were debating between straight versus meandering, and now we're assessing the parking between the two.
Okay. For the meander, we actually gain more parking spaces, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one has 10 in
Okay.
total, so it's 5 on each side, but the street version, I think here has 2, here has 3, and here has another 3.
But this could have more parking. That's just a choice. We can add
Yeah.
more spaces. I think we can get to equal parking on each option. So we shouldn't let that, let's go back to the discussion
Yeah.
about the meander on its merits. Because I think we could add parking from either scenario.
I agree.
Because this one can change this parking.
I'm sorry, and Ray, you might have to speak up a little bit louder just so they can hear you. I know you're soft spoken, but what was your question?
Yeah, I was saying for the street version, we can also have one of the planting plus turn into the parking spaces.
We could, yeah. I mean, it's going to ripple up because it may affect how we put dining tables or event spaces, but
Or the dining tables could be movable and change at night.
could be. I mean,
Okay.
I don't
bringing in
think so.
tables at night is kind of a chore for a restaurant. So it'd be better if they were out there.
On the tables on 43rd are there all the time.
That's the point, is we don't have the staff to take them out on at different hours. Like that requires having a full-time staff.
And they're
Costs a lot
big
more
and heavy
expensive
and
Yeah.
probably somewhere to store them too.
I was thinking the small ones, I think they can park. They take
Oh, the
the-
folding ones.
Yeah,
But where do they get stored and who takes them in and out?
Are you volunteering?
Do you have a budget for that? Because that'd be awesome.
So it's tough, but to some degree, it's movable. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, hopefully like the restaurants will take over some of the responsibility. Like if this hopefully is a cafe that can do stuff. One of the challenges with this configuration, 2 things that I noticed is that there's no room for the picnic tables here. Parking gobbles up this with a green space here. So you really only have this corner. And you can have a little bit of cafe tables in here, but like really, like it's not able, if the restaurant doesn't want to manage it, it's likely not to have anything because it's not enough room for the picnic tables that are more static. You really need more space there to do that. And from the market perspective, I think it's a really big challenge because you're pressed up against the buildings and if people are lining up for vendors, it's kind of a crunch point for that walking area. And I've just worked with a lot of markets and they really prefer that linear,
Right.
that the linear
Corridor.
application. Yeah.
Yeah, I know U Heights used to have that parking lot was there and they had back to back and it worked okay, but it was
Yeah.
one circuit. This one would be kind of a pretty complex meander, you know, to
Yeah.
go around.
This is the layout at the market at Capitol Hill near my house. And so
Okay.
they take advantage of this. This is like Jenny Street.
Got it.
Mhm,
And they use the plaza and kind of walk around the ones in the middle there because it's there.
mhm.
They do use this. And I think that like if we did have an overflow space, we could do if there was a really natural space to do that, we could do some sort of yeah.
The Capitol Hill one though works sort of as the island. They were saying that the Meander Street would. I feel like that one is the ones east of the light rail station, the ones west, and then in the plaza. It is sort of these zones,
Mhm.
and the Meander provides those zones. So I don't know if that's a pro or a con or neither, but it is what it is.
The meander could meander a little less also, right? I mean, you could add.
Yeah,
some
they said
dimension.
that was possible, but it would just make, it
And
would,
it cuts into the pedestrian or the areas for the furnishing spaces if it meanders less.
And it also means if you can't have a 10 by 10, two 10 by 10 tents back to back. If you reduce it, then all of a sudden we lose 45 tents.
You could put
Okay.
tents here instead. You gain space for tents over here.
We could, we just have to keep that fire lane, right?
Right, but I mean, you'd basically slide this way, so you'd have, again, a run of tents instead
Oh, I
of
see.
two islands. So the tents you lose here, you'd gain there.
So it becomes
There.
the market just with a slight meander.
Yeah. The other challenge I see is that you create these large islands over here that I don't know what the plan is for. This, like,
oh, the bulbs on the corners.
yeah, it's just you get these really big spaces where there's absolutely no activity. And so, I mean, that might be a place to put the green area. Some of the green work that we want.
How wide does the fire lane?
18. 18 wide.
18 feet.
If there are two-way or separate.
This,
9 feet
yeah,
each.
Yeah.
So they
Nine
would go,
feet.
they would just take over both lanes if they needed to in an emergency. Yeah.
you know, when we proposed the bulbs on the Brooklyn Street too, I sort of was thinking, what the hell is happening on Brooklyn?
Yeah,
If it's not activated.
It's not it's just housing.
but it could
But
be
I
a place for
think
trees.
exactly, a place for trees, a place for plantings, and just the sidewalks do get busy, and if this street suddenly is much more activated, I would presume those corners get more activated when those towers finish.
Yeah.
I think it'll be busy, and so even though there's really nothing for it right now, I think if you build it, there will be something that uses it.
Could you put like a planting on the corner here to get, instead of the bollards, that allows for a little bit of green space and seating around it, but then it like
Early.
naturally blocks the cars from driving in?
That's sort of similar to the corner where the light rail station
Exactly,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Kinda
think something
carries
like
that
that would be able to happen, yeah.
The other thing I want to point out on this is like, I just like the scale of the material. I feel like these feel very Las Vegas, like gigantic. It feels very downtown Seattle where it's like 4 feet by 4 feet kind of
Yeah.
a thing. This feels much more in keeping with the intricate urban nature of this district.
Would
I
you guys
agree.
agree that the pavers, this is the paving we kind of want to go for, regardless of whether it's meander or market?
So they're what, more on the order of 2 by 2?
Or even
something,
less,
Or
yeah.
less.
Or rectangular, yeah.
Hmm.
But an actual paver.
The light rail station has the octagonal ones. I mean, I think there's a bunch of different types of pavers you could look at, but, and they could be stone or they could be cement.
And I think the pavers make sense too, because if it becomes a less busy street, it won't be as high impact, and therefore the places that need to get fixed and touched up would be better repaired by the pavers rather
By
than.
granular approach. right?
Exactly.
You could also bring the pavers up the alley, and maybe change the material, the color.
Oh my God, Allegro would love that.
Yeah, I like that approach. And if we can set the tone with picking a paver that is iconic for the U district, you know, whatever we choose, that's what we try to use on future projects. I think that'd be great.
For other
to create that network of public open space. So people know that, oh, I must be in the U district, because, you know, in Barcelona, they do that in Paseo de Gracia, where they have the octagonal ones that were designed by Gaudí, and everyone knows that's only in Barcelona.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if we could find something that, you know, would just kind of say, this is us.
Or it could be in Seattle.
Actually, Barcelona has two patterns. There's an older one, but it's okay.
Correct, they do.
And
They
New
have
York has the
small
octagonal ones
square,
too.
and then they have
Right.
the octagonal ones in the sunshine. Yeah.
Oh, Barcelona also has the long one leading from the hill to the river, to the ocean.
The Ramblas,
Yeah,
No, no,
Yeah,
but it has
that's
the
Ramblas.
way is the cover linear.
you're right, they do. Yep.
Is
So,
it, is it possible to take the pavers across the crosswalk?
are you saying at the
Potentially.
intersections?
Yeah,
I think
Okay,
I think you could, I think, I mean, if you look at the other example, they have what looks like pavers kind of in the middle of the street. I think maybe the strategy is just to make them a darker version of that paver. So I think visually they've seen that people looking at their phones step out into traffic and they're trying to create a visual delineation. And maybe that texture just keeps going, but with a different color.
And who knows, maybe they put a nice little mural in that intersection or something. I think the mural in that along the Ave would be really nice and grounding.
so we like the materiality of the continuous paver
Yep.
of some sort, and we'd love to have stone if we can afford it, if not, then concrete. So
Right.
that is for either approach. Do you want to go and do the different pieces, then come back to see how we can do the meander versus market question, or what do you think would be a good use? What other problems do we have with either of these that kind of make it hard for us to make the decision between those two, you know, approaches? Meander.
I
Well,
I
Go
wanna-
ahead, Mark.
yeah, I'm sorry. I think that the bollards versus furniture question can also be mixed. You don't have to, you know, there might be on either one of these schemes. Some big anchors at the corners maybe, and then the bollards in other places. I don't think you have to do all bollards or no bollards. You might think about making edges and entries with solid pieces and the bollards defending where you need it to defend, where you can't do it otherwise.
Like at the intersections and such, yeah.
Right.
I feel like I already see illegal parking all the time in the U district and all of Seattle and everywhere in the world. But without bollards, I fear that people really will just sort of park up onto the sidewalk, and that new street up on Capitol Hill, the Melrose Promenade. There's no bollards. It's all ambiguous. Where's car space? Where's people space? And bollards are just such an effective way of keeping cars off the sidewalk and out of the pedestrian space. And I think it's so important.
So
No,
mix your body and furniture.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. I absolutely agree with that. But you know, a big solid seating bench will do the same thing. And I think you can mix those two.
Yeah.
As we saw in the examples, yeah, that was a good idea.
As long as the furniture is immovable.
Right.
Right. When people are dining outside, they have the tissues and things that are lightweight, and there's when they are easily blowing away.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of some form of meditative fences so that they can block those garbage when they are blowing away.
Oh, yes.
And they also create some green buffers between the vehicular road and the seating area.
So creating a little walls and rooms around the picnic
Some like a
table.
wooden fence. Or it could be textured glass.
And how would you do that for line of sight? I mean, you'd have to, I guess the glass would take care of it. I mean, you'd be able to see through things because we want to make
Yeah.
sure it's defensible.
I don't think it would be too tall.
Okay.
So a little taller than the tables, but leaving the eye level, the eye level.
Okay. So maybe some taller furniture that might work to block some of the airflow.
You have to kind of balance that with visibility for businesses
Yeah.
Right.
and also just making sure that material, if it gets damaged, is easy to repair or paint over.
Yeah.
Yeah, for any furniture.
The reason we did the tables up on 43rd is that we didn't have to move them every night. Also, we could paint them every day. They literally get destroyed every day. And so we're out there with a spray can and just catch it up. And it's super,
That checks out.
doesn't have to be the only strategy, but that's just the one that was the least amount of work.
Yeah.
we're lazy, but, and have limited resources. I would just say, I'd go back to this really quick and just say, like, we talked about having people congregate at this intersection, and I feel like this fights that insofar that this greenery, I don't think needs to be there. And also, there's very limited space for seating here, and I would like to see this expanded on both sides, just so that you could have, I mean, right now, as they're requiring us to step 2 feet back from the street with the tables. And that includes the 7.5 foot umbrella, which is the small umbrella. And so that kind of pushes us into the pedestrian pathway here. And so if we could meander less, at least, if not just go to this one, I think it would help us have the ability to make this feel like a very social intersection.
Yeah, emotionally, I want the meander with all my heart. But logistically, I think the straight one works better for function.
This one, if we have like event or a street market or something, what is the difference between this and this? It seems like this one is really great.
There's a
There's the
diagram.
street
Can you pull
And
that one up,
this
Kate?
one,
Oh,
so
you
it
found it.
means this one is like 210, like
Yep,
side by
back.
side.
Back to
So
back.
people
Yeah.
will look from here and from here.
correct.
Mhm. Hmm.
So you'll walk around it and then you'll walk around it and around.
And I worry about the pinch here.
Yeah,
It'd be
that's what-
tight, it'd block the sidewalks
Yeah.
in terms of people being able to get.
It'd be like walking down the sidewalk
So
in
in
Ballard.
this area will be dead. This one is like straight,
So these ones would theoretically be facing out towards the thing, and people would walk
right?
this way.
Right, that will be very successful.
And then people
I can
going to
see.
the businesses can still use the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes they serve both ways. I mean, you see it, like
Yeah,
depending on the business.
So is there a way that we could put in enough of the meander on the straight market plan, like at the intersection, so that cars get that indicator that, okay, this is something special. We already have the raised platform, so everything's raised, so the car is going up the speed bump.
I think that sounds like a job for site workshop, but we should tell them if there's any meander possible, we would like it.
I don't agree with that. though. Like,
No?
I'm gonna go on. No, I think that it feels suburban in a way that, like, you look at Kirkland, it makes sense there, but this is an old 100-year-old neighborhood. I feel like it fights the bumps in my mind. I love the material, don't get me wrong, but I feel like this feels more like,
So the material we could still bring over.
yeah,
right? That's a
absolutely. But I
possibility.
feel like that just feels like suburban. Like I like the examples they had from Auckland, where it was like, it just felt straighter, and they used some of the furniture to delineate, but it felt like one big living room.
I think the big
Yeah.
thing that the city wanted was the meanders makes it safer. Cars are indicated. So is there any other way that we can indicate to cars that you're in a shared space and you're a guest?
I think the visual cohesion of the pavers will do that.
Okay.
From sidewalk.
That's what I was
Into
thinking. I was
street.
put down. I was gonna say, the other advantage that I like of the straight one is just also the places where the potential for seating
Mhm.
kind of matches up more with the kind of,
Businesses.
you know, the businesses and so on.
I
And I
agree.
like the idea of not having, because of the way the meander works, you end up with cars parked next to where the seating is and that sort of thing, which I just think the straight one might be a nicer experience and, yeah.
Corey, what would you feel about, what would you all feel about making this not a raised intersection, so that when you turned into the street, you felt like you were turning into a special area?
I think if buses will always be on the Ave, that makes sense. But if there's ever a chance to get buses off the Ave, then we can animate that entire block, those 2 blocks.
Because I mean, you could always raise this later if you raised on the Ave.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what I like about Bell Street is it feels like you're turning into someone's driveway.
Oh, you like that one?
I-
I've been looking that one, I'm like,
Bell Street has
will
its
fit.
challenges, but I do like the turning up, and you're going up a curve. And it's like, oh, now I'm going into this new space. I mean, just from a driver's perspective, it feels different.
With the
than-
racing cars down here, I mean, if this was at street level, would that be enough indicator to slow down? Because that's where they're
Yeah.
dragging and they're
I'm-
doing donuts.
I'm worried about people coming, I'm worried about people coming this way and speeding. And so if we want to slow them down, I think the change in bumps here might do that, but yeah, that's just one
And
observation.
right now, programming it, it's a big space. So I could see us programming 1/2 for an event, but maybe not both halves. They still have to cross the Ave, which is gonna bus traffic and so.
Right. Well, that's what I was also wondering is it really, Are we thinking of this as a potential market that replaces or is the existing market that
supplement,
goes down here, or
supplements.
more like
Midweek, yeah.
midweek? So
Or,
it might
or a different kind of
only be
market,
after-
maybe a nostalgia market or, artifacts or art.
We talked about doing like.
Or like flea market,
Yeah.
okay,
Maybe on the same day as the market so that we
Okay.
get people animating the entire app
right.
activated.
I'm thinking either a cheaper alternative would be to paint the crossing markings into different colors, like
Even-
some artful crosswalks.
But leave them at the street level or raise it?
Leave them at the street level.
Well, you could do, instead of raising the whole intersection, is only raise the crosswalks. That way there's still sort of the bumps.
That's hard for the buses.
I don't know.
It's also hard for drainage.
Oh,
Yeah,
Good point,
that
Mark.
checks out.
If you risk it, it's better to risk the whole thing.
I think that back to the curve versus straight, I do think that there's some aspects of the curve that are really helpful, and maybe there is a kink, right, that you could actually just like bend at the alley level so that you're not looking straight through as a driver. That may keep all the good features of letting the market be there, those kinds of things, but give just a little bit of distinction. And you'd have to draw it to really see whether it's going to work, but you know what I'm saying? You just, at the alley, you kink it. Do this the right way. Right.
So if
That
you
may
start
play with
with
it. But I also think, there was a discussion of stringing lights across and some resistance to that. And I didn't understand what the resistance was. What the
I
problem
think for
is.
construction equipment and trucks, they were concerned about the catenary lights being not high. They have to be quite high.
Like
think-
16-foot clearance, right?
But no, I think higher. I think Allegro just had theirs restrung. Do you know what height they're at? I think they're at 20.
I don't think they're quite that high. I think they're more like 16.
Are they?
Yeah,
Okay,
but I
and
think, like Pike Place Market has the lights over the street there. I think we just have to figure out like what type of light. So are we thinking about the donuts that they were showing in that kind of European
Right.
example, or are we thinking about catenary lights with like cafe looking, or like,
Right.
what's I think the purpose of the lights would kind of dictate what kind of lights.
And how we're gonna
No.
connect them, either to buildings directly with owner's permission or to poles, right? Because some of the buildings are old,
Yeah,
so they're concerned. But that would definitely be it'd be great to have that canopy over the street, because it would indicate this is a space to meander or to walk
On this one, where is the sitting area?
in the yellow.
They're in the
The
yellow.
yellow one.
That's where the furnishings are.
So right here, so I mean, this is like sitting area. This
Yep.
one sitting area. This one.
So blue is where it's sidewalk. There's nothing there. It's just walking space. Yellow is where you can hang out and sit.
Put someone.
And then the green is where plants are.
So going back to Mark's concern, is there a way that we put a kink in the alleys, or is there a way we can indicate it with material, like they have shown in the market one? How can we put a mid-block kind of slow down indicator to cars? And then we can come back to that intersection, find out if, in fact, we do want the raised intersection at University Way, or keep it where it is. And that second decision is on Brooklyn. We already have a raised intersection at the station.
Mhm.
Is Brooklyn, since it doesn't take the buses, is that okay to have it raised there and keep the Ave low?
So just like thinking about, go ahead.
I thought part of the purpose of doing the raised intersection on the Ave was to have it also function to slow down traffic on the Ave crossing. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's what their goal
And
was.
to
I
connect
thought-
the two sides of the
and to
street.
connect it, yeah.
I think they're gonna have to do it in the same way they did the 43rd Street intersection,
Right.
because they have to make it so gradual.
Right,
I drive over that all the time. You never notice it's a bump. It is technically raised, but it's raised over 20 feet.
right.
And so it just doesn't signal to
Doesn't have the
drivers.
same-
And so I'm just wondering, like, if you get the benefit here that I mean, it shows it as very small here, but I think you're gonna have to start raising it back here to make the buses.
Yeah, I think Mark and Kevin were trying to make it more abrupt.
Okay, if they're allowed.
If Metro allows them to give the indication to cars to, hey, slow down, you're gonna mess up your nice car.
I think
become
to
racing
your
down.
question, Corey, though, the color of the paver could indicate stuff here. So is there an opportunity to pull the darker paver into here? Or maybe leave it off the sidewalk, but then put it in the street so that it kind of.
Kind of like what they did here.
Yeah.
Right. So
This one feels very, again, suburban, this kind of sandstone thing. I see it like in a lot of, like in Bellevue and stuff. I feel like this feels more consistent with our neighborhood fabric. But
so we're okay with keeping the street distinct from our special street, right? Are we okay with that? And then as far as the raised intersection, we have, two considerations.
Right, one other thing you can do with the raised is that the pavement can be, can make noise on your tires. Right, it can be
Okay.
a little rough. And that will slow people down too. It's a really intricate balance because people have to be able to walk across it, so it can't be a tripping hazard at all, right? But it's perfectly possible to do, so it gives a rumble to the cars.
And we have concern with bikes and wheelchairs, just making
Right.
sure that anyone on a wheel, right?
Right, but it can be done.
Okay.
do people like this kind of material?
I do.
Sure.
Something
fine.
paver.
Yeah.
I like that approach better than the stamped concrete. 43rd Street seems ugly.
Yeah.
Seems common.
Seems like a project we'll fix in the future.
Yeah. And that
Is-
was just without a lot of community involvement. So just letting you know that what we're doing is going to make a difference.
Is the paver a possibility for the, to get an artist involved?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Once
There's-
we've decided
yeah.
paver, can we come up with
A cool design.
5 iterations
Yeah,
of a cool
Actually,
paver?
Joshua is the lead of the 1% for art for SDOT. So he's sitting at a table so we can talk to him about what's possible.
But maybe there's a shape that could be unique to this neighborhood that we could buy a lot of, and it's like not super complicated, but it,
And replace.
like an octagon, it fits together well, but it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
Right.
Question.
A mold.
ahead.
I'm sorry, Mark, did you say something?
It could be a mold that you can reuse too. I mean, there's even-
How likely are we able to use recycled materials of pavers?
I think the city would consider that, yeah. As long as they're durable.
Have we covered all the topics? I
That's what I'm
should
trying to
come
do.
back to, yeah, what were the
Scroll to the
topics we were
topics
supposed
list.
to?
One thing I just want to call out really fast, are we aligned that maybe less plantings, especially closer to the Ave, just because they become trash receptacles? You'd have
Yes,
space,
I
you can
Just
agree.
scroll down. to
Less,
that and all
less
this.
plant near the edge.
Right, but,
Like this seems like a mess,
oh,
and
yes.
this seems like a mess. I mean, trees, yeah, it's important, but like big open pits of plants that no one's gonna manage. Maybe that's-
Right.
We do have Maureen on the call, and we have Maya here. So you guys both represent businesses on the Ave or places.
Yeah,
Looking at the
let's let
loading,
it be
delivery,
a-
pickup and
clear.
parking, do you guys have any
Because if you look
special
at it,
concerns or
like a big
questions or
space, I wouldn't know what
input?
they can hear.
Plantings supposed to be out.
I'm sorry, I'm getting like a mixed, the audio is really mixed. Were you asking me?
Yeah, sorry, we'll try to just have one conversation at a time, but Maureen, since you joined us here and Maya's here, you guys both have, entities on the street. We're talking about parking, loading, and last time at the last meeting, I think we all came to an agreement that we have a priority of, we want loading for businesses first, and we want short-term parking for the pickups and drop-offs for food deliveries. And then we want to have, an ADA, of course, above all that, and then we want to have short-term parking, I believe, like just enough time to pick up or drop off stuff for regular people. And then at night, maybe it changes into 2-hour parking where you can enjoy dinner. So we are thinking about parking and loading. Are you guys okay with the way the parking is going? Or do you have any input?
I'm not sure I can fully see clearly what you have. I'm a stakeholder at the Stanford apartment, the building across from the Vineyard Vines. So loading for my tenants is critical. Moving into the building, obviously. So that would be my main concern.
Okay, and on the designs you see on the screen, one of them has them right in front of your building, the other one has it directly across the street, but we made sure there was parking there for that specific need. And the La Paz building is also residential, so we wanted to make sure there was parking there. So do you think that the way it's rendered is good? I just want to make sure that we covered our bases there. We can say, yep, go for it.
So two parking spaces, is that what I'm seeing in front of our building?
3. I think there's going to be 3 in front of your building.
2 loading, delivery, and 1 food pickup.
And these would be short term. So they'd park for half an hour, or if they get the permit, they have a moving truck. They can get that permit and they can be there long enough to move in.
Oh, but there's not a loading zone directly in front of us.
There is. There is.
On the
Loading.
There is,
straight
okay.
version of the street, there is.
And on the meander, it's a loading zone just across the street. And again, it's a pedestrian street where jaywalking is fine. So
Do you guys mind if I annotate on this? Because there was some discussion about a more subtle meander, and I had an idea.
okay, go for it.
So if we cut off this and move and flip it and put parking on the other side, same here, you cut this off and then you put parking on the other side.
Okay.
You have a much more subtle meander. So it's still, the curb line is like this.
A little moving this way.
So we're looking at the drawing.
And then you move the parking onto the opposite side of the street. So the parking would be on the north side. Let me see if I can draw something here.
Okay, so the meander would just be that, like what Mark was talking about, this little glitch. And maybe with trees or with plantings, we could try to make it more of a visual, right? A friction point for cars to slow down while still supporting a market.
Yeah, well, still supporting a market and, I heard people didn't like the parking right next to the cafe. So this flips the parking to the opposite side where there's a narrower pedestrian path and then makes the meander a little bit more subtle.
So it's a compromise solution that might work well for both, getting a little bit of each. How do you guys
Yeah.
feel about Table and Mark and Maureen online?
Yeah, I think the meander, a softer meander should be explored.
It
But
doesn't feel like it's much of a meander at all at that point, right?
yeah. But I wonder if from visual, if I'm a car turning onto the street, any little kink in the road would be a signifier. I don't
Depending on
know.
where we place trees, maybe if you see a tree right in front of you, you might want to slow down. But
And I think that by making this not a 40-foot roadway, which I think it's 35 feet or whatever it is today, I think that making this 18 feet is going to be a huge calming effect on this road.
Yeah.
And I think that with the pavers, it'll signal you have to pay attention differently. So I don't know if we have to throw every single solution at trying to slow down cars.
Absolutely.
I just go back to thinking that this makes sense. Even though it doesn't have the kink, but we can do all those other things to make the cars calm down.
so this, Don was referencing the market.
The straight.
The straight version, yeah.
And I think we can add some parking, like she was talking about over here. I think right now there's 2, but we could put 3 in front of the tree is kind of irrelevant right there because there aren't any today.
Especially if somebody moves in with a giant moving truck.
You want that contiguous.
Yeah.
And that's why I think they've placed 2 loading zones there.
Yeah, but I think in this one, I think there's more, it feels like there's more contiguous space here. I think it were the 3. So maybe we just kick the tree to the end
Yeah.
and we just do this,
Maureen, is that good for you? If we do, made sure that there's plenty of loading area in front of the Stanford?
I mean, yeah, there would have to be, we have about 25 to 28 apartments switch out annually. So
Wow.
that is something that we are struggling with already and now
Every other week.
fearful of losing, yes.
So if
I mean,
everyone-
that's the nature of this building or the neighborhood, really. It's transient due to the UW and the hospital. So that's a big concern for us.
Okay, well, that's good then. It sounds like that would work for the Stanford, and also we could probably do that for the La Paz to some degree since they're both residential. That's great. So we did the parking.
Yeah, I think the parking after 8 o'clock, instead of 2 hours, we should just open like right now.
Yeah,
After 8 o'clock,
Yeah,
instead of 2 hours, we just open
Yeah.
like what we have right.
Yeah, we could. So,
maybe retain one of the loading zones or
And an
something.
Yeah.
yeah, ADA always stays. Okay, got it. So we do temporal, a diurnal change.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is there,
Yeah.
are there going to be trash cans added to this street?
There probably would be. yeah.
Hopefully, because there's none on 43rd right now.
Yeah, that is obviously
only one by
a
our-
huge concern for this area, especially if we're going to be asking people to hang out and eat.
Yep.
That's good. So we'll put that on the list. That's good.
Yeah, every time we have the street fair here, there's trash sort of left everywhere.
I have my thesis on trash.
That's right. Ray did his thesis on trash. Good. And what about the balance between planting and hardscape? I know that Meander has more planting strips and this one has fewer.
we were talking over here just about like pulling it back from the Ave,
Right, you don't need the plantings.
Okay.
like this stuff. It feels like it's misplaced.
And you don't necessarily need big planting boxes. You could put like some of those oversized pots to still get some greenery and,
On a hardscape. Yeah.
yeah.
Could it be overhead plantings?
Oh, you mean like a flower
Depends on the
basket?
lighting.
Yeah.
We do that. Yeah.
Already.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah,
Have it
along the
continue.
whole app.
Yeah, we have geraniums, we do that.
Or it could be vines climbing on.
Mine sure, okay, they always just destroy
Yeah,
everything
brick
that they
buildings,
go up.
yeah.
Could we add more plantings over here, like in this little area?
Yeah, I think the Brooklyn intersection needs a little more loving.
Yeah, me too. I think there needs to be trees.
I mean, the one thing I like about not having the crosswalk,
Yeah.
having the crosswalks open at 43rd where they've raised the intersections, I just walk diagonally.
Well, you still could do that. It's more just like,
to
instead of, I mean, it just feels like we said we want so much greenery, yet we're trying to put it where we want to put people.
I see.
I think if, I don't mind leaving
Especially
this,
since these aren't activated.
right, and if
businesses.
we don't care about the greenery, then let's leave this alone, but if we need to put it somewhere, maybe we put it over there.
Okay. You guys.
I'm like just wondering. So wait, this one is all parking right here. Will it make it feel this one become like a dead area sketchy again? Maybe not, huh? Because right here, there will be sitting area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eyes on the
People
street.
street, yeah. Good, okay, surfacing we covered, seating and bollards, I think we covered that to some degree, want a nice healthy balance of both.
I
Lighting.
have just a quick question about the seating. Sorry. Is it going to be the picnic tables that are on 43rd?
It's probably too early to tell, but that could be one of the options, yep. But what
Okay.
ideas do you have?
So I have a question. When we have the market, what happens to the seating? Because we're showing the market in those seating areas.
I think it depends if a restaurant has taken over that area permanently, the market wouldn't be able to use that area.
Well, in Ballard, what they do is they made it healthy because the businesses had to compete with the market. That's what they do is they allow for their outdoor structures to be used for the market during the market time.
But that's the only place in Seattle that happens. And so we'd have to make sure that, I don't know if that's a guarantee here. just to be-
Right, it's not a guarantee, but I know they found a work.
For that again.
Like, so if you pulled a street cat, like Rick McLaughlin, like, he built his, the Big Time Brewing, you can't move that and then do a market in that space because it's a setup for a restaurant, right? And so if somebody builds something permanent here that is set up only for a restaurant, it doesn't accommodate. In Ballard, they did a really cool thing, like you're saying, is they made it so that this side is open. And so you can just set up in this restaurant space during the market and serve out here. And then you close it back up during the week and the restaurant uses it as a restaurant. It's very cool. Maybe that's.
And so
what
the
we-
businesses are responsible for moving their furniture then?
Yeah, and if it was
Okay.
us managing the blue tables, we would have to just move them out of the way. And maybe we can
Okay.
pull them around the corner to the Ave for the day. And that's just part of the market operation. So I see.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Use
I mean,
them to help
they-
close off the street.
There is market,
Yeah.
the street will be closed.
Yeah.
So how about we put the tents in the center?
Do we need the fire lane?
The fire department won't let you, you need emergency access.
The fire trucks go on the two sides.
Yeah.
They have to go in the middle because of
We used to-
trees and lights and furniture.
If you look at the street fair, the old pictures, we used to do that. We used to set them up in the middle.
Yeah.
And they require 20 feet. 18 minimum.
Yeah, so we're stuck with
But is another option to be in the furnishing areas to not have necessarily permanent tables out there? It could also be.
it could be the ones that Ray's suggesting, yeah.
Yeah,
But that comes with the labor issue.
yes,
Yeah.
right, right.
But if a restaurant
So
wants,
it's a cost and balance.
so if a restaurant wants to take that on, they have the labor.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
5 more
I-
minutes.
Yeah,
maybe-
I was
maybe
just,
having staff.
Go ahead.
I was
Bethany.
just gonna,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
Maureen.
just wanted to ask, who is in charge of sort of manning these dining table areas? Is it the restaurant or,
We currently have a combination.
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag.
okay,
So I mean, depending on the area, there's a specific owner. So like in front of Boba Up, there's an area that Boba Up manages. In front of the post office, the UDP, that's what I work with. We manage those because no one else is there to do it.
gotcha.
But
And
I think
those stay out overnight? And is there an issue with vandalism or?
Always.
Always, yeah.
Always.
And so what we did is we picked materials that, like the
Right.
picnic table, we can just paint them every morning when they
Right.
get received. So it's very easy for us to fix. If we pick something that's a little more delicate, we're gonna have to figure out how to powder coated folding chairs and tables probably have to come in at night.
Okay, so we've gone
And is
through the-
there an issue with people, hanging out after hours on these tables? Like late into
Sometimes.
the evening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's people that do. I think weather really determines kind of what people do.
The turnover is pretty good on those tables. They're constantly being used by different people.
Yeah, my concern would just be overnight in the late hours. Because
Yeah.
this street is like an echo chamber at night. You
Yeah.
can hear every tiny noise, and we have 55 people living in our building. And that's our number one turnover is caused by noise.
Yeah, it's very urban. I think the trees will help with some of that when the leaves are in. That'll help model the noise, but
Yes.
Also,
the urban environment. Yep.
we were very
Yeah.
careful not to put seating in front of your building too. We did that in Belltown, and there were a couple of buildings that just said exactly what you said, is that people hang out there until 2 a.m. And then,
Yeah.
and it's just really
Yeah,
annoying.
yeah. For us, it's between, it's midnight and 6 o'clock. People hang out on the steps across the street at the church.
Yeah.
And the sound is unbelievable.
Maybe
Got it.
it's,
So,
maybe it's restaurants at the church that can manage their own seating and bring it in at night. And then maybe the more permanent seating happens closer to University Way where there's still some residents.
So what he's talking about, people hanging out in the church, it's not people hanging out. Those people are some kind of like doing the craft.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
those
we
people.
have people we have to worry about. So we only have a couple minutes left, but we have to go back to the meander versus markets. We have 3 proposals. One is a straight shot market, one is a meander, and one is kind of a merge. Do we have a strong preference, or do we want to have the consultants in the city maybe entertain more than one option?
Think not meander.
Okay,
That's right.
is everyone okay with that? Online, are you guys okay if we kill the meander? I mean, we should still have 2 options.
I do like the paver, but I like the straight.
Okay,
If we consider meander, take less stuff from meander.
a less meander, kind of like what Bethany suggested. Okay. We wanted them to consider the market and the half meander.
Yeah, softer meander, I think should be explored, but not necessarily married yet.
Is everyone okay? And online, are you guys okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we did the meander, we have loading delivery, events, anything else on the list of topics? Is there anything else on the topics that we need to cover or that do we think we have?
I have 2 central address. One is the alleyways. I found on this side, up from 42nd to 43rd, will be a hotel. And their car entrance is from the alleyway. So the alley entrance is also important to consider.
Yeah.
I think the straight line version more efficiently for drivers and also thinking about the safety, turning at a 90-degree angle. And the second thing I want to address is talking about graffiti vandalism. I think people have a desire to create something.
Yep.
And people to post things on the light poles.
Yep.
there's a demand for that kind of public interaction,
kiosk.
self-creativity, and there's no public space for that.
Yeah,
So if we create a physical space for that kind of thing,
one of those big round bulletin boards.
theoretically, there'll be less.
A place for it.
But
Good
I'm not
idea.
sure about.
Great, thanks.
So take out your last thought right now. Maybe 20 more
Make one other comment about the alleys.
Roof.
You may
Go ahead.
actually want to make sure that you're lighting them.
Yes,
Well, so that as people are going down the sidewalk, that there isn't a dark space to your side, right?
Got it.
I think that will just help with the perception of safety significantly.
Call us to the end. We're gonna do the group reports. So, does any group, or can we start with your group, Corey?
sure. So we're gonna go ahead and report
Let's hear
everyone. Okay. Go for it. You sure? Okay. Architect for this. So I'm gonna jump in there, but I don't know if I can read your handwriting, sorry. Okay. Okay, perfect. So I think between the meander and the market, we kind of came up with another solution where we definitely like the straight shot market better, but we considered a soft meander is what we called it, where we're kind of taking some of the extremities and making it a little bit more of a jog or a little blip right there at the alleys to slow down traffic. So we don't know how that would look, but we would like to see how that might be rendered in sketch form. So that's kind of the biggest one between the two. As far as loading, delivery, and pickup and parking, I think we're all in agreement. We might actually add a couple more parking spaces to the market approach, just to make sure there's plenty of room for loading and unloading at apartments. As far as the events, the market was easier for us to consider how you could do an effective market with the number of tents that we need to have. So that worked better than the meander. Balance of planting and landscape, we were thinking, we like the mature trees. We don't necessarily like the big patches of landscaping that's in the meander at the end of the parking spots. And we thought that as an alternative, is there a way we could bring some more of that vegetation to the intersections, the curbs, where they're not going to be maintained by any businesses. There's a lot of open space there. So can we put mature trees and vegetation there? As far as the surfacing, I think we're all in agreement. We love the idea of the continuous paver, and we hope we can find some kind of iconic shape or paver that could be indicative of the U district that we can start using elsewhere as our palette of materials. The seating and bollards, we wanted to make sure like balance. We don't have to be rigorous and put a bollard everywhere, but it might be interesting to have, a play between bollards and furniture to create that edge on the curbless street. One thing that might come up, I've seen, bollards that have lights in them. That might be a nice way to put light on the street without having, to supplement the lighting overhead. And then lighting, I think we talked about doing the catenary if possible, but, we want to make sure it's high enough, and it would definitely create that shaped living room with kind of a festival space feel to it.
So we meant the catenary. I think you said right now you were only considering down the two sides, but I think we're saying if we could do it, we think across the street would be preferred.
And then just at a high level, thinking about like the nature, kind of the feeling of the design as a whole, like trying to get away from a suburban feel and maybe kind of embrace the urban. And that's why we like the smaller pavers that, I feel a little bit more human scale. Also just like some of the way we address the plantings and the permanent furniture in the street we just want to think about that. Lastly, just like really forcing the activity towards the center of the Ave, away from some of the apartments that might not want to have all that activity later into the evenings. So finding a real good space on all four corners to have that outdoor seating, whether it's from a restaurant or from a managed area.
Is that everything? Anything online? Bethany, Maureen, and Mark?
My only thing is that little the space right in front of where the alleys are on that street is critical for the dumpster pickup. They come every single night, and that is their way of accessing both alleys and their turnaround space, and where they lift up every dumpster. They bring them from the alley sometime to the front of that, exactly that little bend where you want to meander. So that's just a consideration, as well as for the above lights.
Good, thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Kevin at the middle table.
We had a lot of consistency with what you all said and some differences too. So that's interesting. We also didn't, can you put the list of topics back up? Sure. As far as straight and meander, there was mixed opinions, but the majority of our group preferred the straight shot. And I think to a large extent that was because of how it interacted with events. So the straight was preferred. We also thought that we should add a few more parking spaces, maybe a couple more parking spaces total to get it up a little bit. One of the things we talked about in there was making sure there was parking for technicians and other people, service people that didn't necessarily neatly fit into that 30-hour load zone to operate on the different businesses here. In terms of the bollards versus eclectic furnishings as the edge, there was inclination towards the bollard approach, but with some mixing. So it doesn't have to be necessarily as rigid. And especially if we went with consistent paving, there was a strong preference for the bollard approach with that concept. As far as the consistent paving versus distinct paving types, we were completely mixed on that. So we had no agreement in our group on which was better, but there was a lot of interest in both. Typically wasn't super strong opinions on it had to be one or the other. We didn't talk about planting. For lighting, we like the pedestrian poles, and we also would prefer to add catenary lighting. We didn't talk exactly about which orientation we prefer, but adding more of that festival lighting approach. We also like that the pedestrian poles could be used to have other like event or seasonal elements on them as part of the neighborhood care. We talked about how the bollards and the light poles should fit with the character of the neighborhood. What else do we get here? Yeah, we like the events a lot more on the straight. All right. Hand it off to you, Mark. Or I said, wait, did I miss something critical that we wanted to say? Okay.
Okay, switching over to Mark's table.
Okay, so our table, the last table 3, we really favored the meander in that. In fact, that was unanimous. I like that it actually promotes the pedestrian first, really does slow the vehicles down upon entry. So there was a clear distinction there with the group. Didn't mean that we couldn't live with the straight concept. We're calling it straight. Market's a little deceptive. Both of them are market capable. So we thought that it would be fair to just say straight meander or spine or linear or something to be more deliberate about what that concept is as far as the layout. Parking, we didn't hear the need. In fact, where there's an acceptance on a curbless situation, if you park across the street, even if you're a delivery person, you've got to walk an extra 18 feet across the street. So in fact, we had Pete here at the table from Little Tie, and we talked through that, but we didn't hear that we needed more at this particular table. And then the diurnal use, meaning day to night, the transition of the parking is great. As far as events, I think there's a curiosity of what the farmers market would think about the two as a driver. We think there's clear voice here that says that's a real driver. And if this is where the farmers market's coming to, let's make sure we really accommodate it. So we're Corey, interested to hear what the farmers market would say about the concepts. To that point, power. For both lighting up the lighting of trees, which can be festival and really pedestrian nature of the street, also can service the farmers market. We don't have to have generators and really pull power from the businesses that you see on occasion with farmers markets. So deliberately allowing for those power connections, I think, could really facilitate and enhance the street in many ways, from event to daily life. The surfacing itself, really like the more mosaic pattern of the meander, really promoted pedestrian street, calming the street down. But we're also curious about how we might take it a step further and do something very particular about through color, mosaics that really speak to the U district and its culture and history. So clear preference there. On lighting, I think I've heard it a couple of times, catenary across the street. If we can pull it off, let's try it. So let's keep that up as a priority item. But like the street poles, that they actually allow for the catenary. So there's the ability to use those versus going to the buildings for the catenary to attach the wires. Seatings and bollards, I think there was more of a preference to use furnishings planting, the parking as barriers versus the monotony of, and maybe we showed the picture, did that a disservice, that those bollards at Park Lane and Kirkland are really close. So, but there was a preference to use the furnishings and the amenity zone to help block, like the Auckland picture, the example that was used. Or that you see down at South Lake Union at the Arbor Blocks, they do a fine job of that through art and furnishings and planting as well. I think, did I miss anything on this our group?
We modified the meander a bit, right?
Oh yeah, Gordon had one idea, and this is kind of interesting. And if you pull open the concept, the meander concept, the east block, there was an idea of, well, the Sunnyside and the restaurants at the north, on the north side, at the Navy and Mod Pizza. You know, it'd be nice to have seating there in front of an inactive Eagles Hall. You could do a straight run through here and only meander on the west side. You don't slow cars down meander, that's the downside. So there was an idea that possibly could be a hybrid of both concepts. That's right, Corey. That's right. So, you know, Eagleson Hall is low, so it does allow for good light penetration down in, especially when you bump it out so severely like we do on the meander. But we take a chunk out for parking. So there's, yeah. So anyway, that was an idea that came to you. Thanks, Gordon. Okay, that's. No, go ahead.
Thank you. On Friday, and we're gonna kind of discuss what we heard today, aggregate all the information and have our takeaways that I believe Corey will send out to everyone, like what we heard. And then the next event is we're gonna refine some of this based on a conversation at the steering committee. So I don't know how exactly yet. And then we're gonna have the public house.
Yeah, the open house is going to be right here. Thanks to John and Judith for hosting us. So it'll be inside this room. It's a public open house. We're going to try to get as many people as possible. So anyone you know that has an interest in the street, please let them come. We're going to have drawings up on the wall. We're going to take ideas and suggestions, but it's going to be framed by the decisions we've made today, with whatever options survive. So thank you.
And then the last thing is that we're going to put out a survey that you and other people can provide further input on. And so I think we'll incorporate some of what we just heard today into this survey. And so, but even if you have the same thoughts, please respond to the survey, give your feedback. And if your thoughts have changed at all, like based on this variation on the meander that they came up with, you can incorporate that into your response to the feedback. All right.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
don't forget, April 19th, right here. There's plenty of extra food. You can take home your family and friends, please.
They're both good.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Hi.
If you're with a professional, if you have a specific, like,
Okay, you're good.
you're
Thank you very much, guys, for joining us online. Sorry you couldn't be here for
Thank you.
the sweets, but. And then maybe we'll
Thank
see
you,
you in
Corey.
person.
Corey.
Bethany, we'll see you on the 19th.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.